Gracie's Bully is the 6th episode of the first season of Back to You. This is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows. And as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in the episode and share some thoughts. There are some really great moments in this episode. I also like the fact that we're getting some more focus on Gracie, as the last few episodes haven't really addressed Chuck and Kelly's approaches to potentially introducing Gracie to Chuck as her father rather than just Kelly's co-worker. And it actually starts off with Gracie arriving at the studio. She's there early because her class are coming for a field trip. And Chuck is then late from tennis, and I felt really awful because they had the staff meeting and I didn't even realise Chuck wasn't there. I felt really bad about that once he arrived. I love Chuck, I love Kelsey Grammer, but I just didn't realise he wasn't there. I don't really know what that says. Gracie then tells Kelly about a kid called Xander who is bullying her, and Chuck tries to give her some advice. Admittedly, the advice I don't think is very good. Basically, it involves retaliating, and I don't agree with the advice, but it was really nice to see him kind of stepping into this fatherly role, and he tries to suggest fighting back with words as well by making fun of his name, and he couldn't think of anything that rhymed with Xander, so he asks her what his surname is, and she says very clearly, Tucker. And of course, it's clear what would rhyme with Tucker. And they very quickly move on from that, and the kids arrive, and Ryan actually identifies a kid who clearly reminds him of himself, but this kid is definitely living a better childhood than what Ryan had, because every time Ryan tries to connect with this child, he just kind of throws it back in his face, not intentionally, but it just seems like everything is water off of a duck's back with this kid, and he's great. I think he's brilliant. And then Marsh says that he's going to entertain them with some poetry, and we come back to that a little later. I rather liked the story with Marsh, but we'll get to that chronologically. We then see Xander actually pulling Gracie's hair. Chuck wants to intervene, but Kelly stops him, and Chuck says to Kelly, she is half mine. And Gary overhears, and I genuinely thought, it was so dramatic, I genuinely thought that somebody was going to find out. I did mention in a previous discussion, I can't remember if it was the last episode discussion, but I did predict that one person will find out, and then another person will find out, and it will kind of just add on from there until eventually everybody knows. And I thought this was the start of that. I was wrong. Gary thought they were talking about a boat that Kelly and Chuck were going to buy together. I can't imagine Kelly and Chuck sharing a boat, but who knows, maybe one day. A kid then does the weather report, and she does an amazing job with it, and she can very clearly say Monongahela River, and she says it multiple times, and I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, because the running joke is that Montana can't say it, so she doesn't want to do this report because she will have to say Monongahela River. And we have a rather fun scene where she's trying to say it, and it doesn't go to plan, but I found it rather amusing. Marsh is then dressed in a baseball uniform, and he starts to recite Casey at the bat, and he's unable to do it. And then we have another moment with Gary, and this was just as dramatic as the first time, even though it might be a little bit repetitive. I actually found it to be rather thrilling, where Chuck says, she's my daughter too, and Gary is standing there again, and they managed to get around this by pretending that they're going to, well, they're not. Chuck wants to name the boat She's My Daughter Too, because his previous boat was called She's My Daughter. That's some very quick thinking. And I think it says a lot about Gary with how easily he bought this. And I think he bought it easily because he's paranoid that he's not getting paid enough. They're getting paid huge salaries. He obviously doesn't know how much they get paid, but he's very concerned that the network is throwing all of their cash at Chuck and Kelly, and he's getting a pittance. And I like the fact that he still doesn't know. He's still clueless. We then have another incident with Xander. I think this was the occasion when he tripped Gracie up. And Kelly had just told Chuck that he's twice Xander's size. he shouldn't approach him. And when this happens, Kelly replies, I'm his size. And of course, Patricia Heaton is 5 foot. No, I'm incorrect. I just fact-checked that just to make sure I was correct. And I'm wrong. She's 5'2". The reason this is a travesty is because I always thought I was the same height as Patricia Heaton. I'm 5 foot. I thought she was 5 foot. I'm a little bit heartbroken now. But the point is that she's roughly the same height as Xander, much closer to Xander's height than Chuck is. And she basically throws him against the wall and threatens him, and it's really sinister. And Chuck praises her, and Kelly actually thanks Chuck for encouraging her to do this, and we have this nice moment where they're both complimenting each other and they're being sincere about it, and that basically never happens, so that was really lovely to see. Ryan then gets some advice from his mini-me, and Gary asks Marsh why he gets upset about Casey at the bat. And honestly, I was not expecting him to say what he says. And he explains that when he was younger, he had a stutter. And his father would take him outside and they'd throw the ball back and forth, and he'd feed him the lines to Casey at the bat one at a time until Marsh was able to recite the poem without a stutter. And this helped him get over the stutter. And that is so lovely and so beautiful. And poetry means different things to different people. And I feel a poem helping you get over a stutter is a pretty big meaning. I thought that was really, really lovely. Kelly is then stressing because Xander's mother is coming to see her. And Chuck says that we are one badass parenting machine, trying to convince her that everything will be okay. He is there to support her. It's really lovely. And unfortunately, Chuck takes one look at Xander's mother, realizes she's very attractive, and basically starts siding with Xander. And in that moment, I didn't like Chuck. And this is not the first time where I've been really dissatisfied with Chuck's behavior. In a lot of ways, he is a very unlikable character. I love him, but at the same time, I hate a lot of his behavior. And unfortunately, this was one of those occasions. Gracie then comes in and says that actually Xander has apologized to her and that apparently he was hurting her because he liked her. And she says, why would you hurt somebody if you like them? And Kelly and Chuck had just finished flicking each other at that moment. And it kind of plants the seed of the idea that maybe Chuck and Kelly do like each other. And I don't know how I feel about that. Because I genuinely don't read that into their relationship. I don't think they hate each other as much as they pretend to. But do they have feelings for each other? I don't know. I'm keen to see where they go with that, but certainly that was implied here. And then it ends with Gary asking about the boat. And I thought it was a really great episode. Really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. Very funny, great performances. And as I said, it's great to have a little bit more focus on Gracie and Chuck in his somewhat fatherly role. Gracie's Bully is a really great episode of Back to You.